You think if you just explain it one more time, if you just make them see how much they've hurt you, they'll finally stop. They won't. In fact, every time you try to reason with them, you aren't protecting yourself. You are handing them the very roadmap they need to hurt you more. The secret isn't in what you scream at them in a fit of rage. It's in the specific, calibrated phrases that cut off their supply, turn the power dynamic on its head, and force them to look elsewhere for their chaos. We have all been there. You are walking on eggshells, rehearsing your sentences, trying to find the perfect way to ask for basic respect, only to be met with gaslighting or a sudden explosive projection of blame. It is exhausting. But what if you stopped performing? What if you stopped trying to win an argument that was rigged from the start? Let's look at the words that actually change the game. The no JADE rule is arguably the most essential survival tactic when interacting with a narcissist, as it directly targets the mechanism they use to maintain control over your emotional landscape. JADE stands for justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining. When you engage in these behaviors, you are operating under the mistaken assumption that you are dealing with an individual who possesses empathy, cares about your perspective, or is interested in reaching a mutually beneficial resolution. In reality, a narcissist views these efforts not as opportunities for healthy communication, but as tactical openings to exploit. When you justify your actions, you are essentially asking for their validation, which gives them the power to grant or withhold it. When you argue or defend yourself, you are providing them with the exact data points they need to gaslight you, shift the blame, or project their own insecurities onto you. When you explain your feelings or your reasoning, you are giving them the manual for your emotional makeup, which they will then use to manipulate you more effectively in the future. By adhering to the no JADE principle, you stop treating the conversation as a bridge toward mutual understanding and start treating it as a boundary to be maintained. This means when a narcissist baits you with a false accusation or a demand for an apology, you provide a neutral, non-reactive response rather than a detailed counter-narrative. You effectively starve them of the emotional supply they gain from watching you scramble to prove your worth or clarify your intentions. The moment you stop providing them with the raw material of your defense, you reclaim your mental autonomy. You are no longer participating in a contest of wills where they set the rules and define the reality. You are simply refusing to play, which is the only way to prevent them from dismantling your peace of mind. Radical acceptance is the profound, sometimes painful process of finally letting go of the exhausting circular hope that the narcissist will eventually change, apologize, or suddenly possess the empathy you have spent so long waiting for them to display. It is not about liking the situation or condoning their toxic behavior, but rather about coming to a complete, sober realization of who they actually are. Most people remain trapped in a cycle of suffering because they are perpetually waiting for the real version of the person to return, the one they imagined existed, or the one who appeared during the initial idealization phase. By practicing radical acceptance, you stop living in the future, hoping for a transformation that is physiologically and psychologically improbable for them. And you start living firmly in the present reality of their limitations. When you stop expecting water from a dry well, you stop being disappointed when you come up empty-handed. This shift in mindset effectively severs the emotional tether that keeps you waiting for an apology that will never come, or a change in behavior that they are incapable of sustaining. It transforms your internal experience from one of desperate, reactive frustration to one of detached, objective observation. You stop trying to fix them, manage their moods, or teach them how to be a better person, because you finally recognize that they are not a project to be completed or a puzzle to be solved. This recognition is liberating. It allows you to detach your self-worth from their erratic actions. Once you accept that their behavior is a fixed trait rather than a temporary misunderstanding, you can finally pivot your energy toward protecting your own peace instead of wasting it on the futile attempt to change a personality structure that is fundamentally resistant to change. The gray rock method is a strategic communication technique designed to make you the most uninteresting person in the narcissist's environment, effectively neutralizing their ability to manipulate you. Narcissistic individuals operate on emotional supply, which they derive from the drama, chaos, and intense reactions they provoke in their targets. When you provide a big emotional reaction, whether it is anger, tears, or an elaborate defense, you are essentially feeding them the very currency they crave. By becoming a gray rock, you consciously choose to be as dull, unresponsive, and uninteresting as a plain, inanimate object. This means your responses in conversations should be short, non-committal, and devoid of emotional charge. Instead of engaging with their provocations or attempting to explain your side of the story, you use phrases like, "I see," "That's interesting," "Okay," or "I understand you feel that way." These responses offer the narcissist absolutely nothing to work with. There is no hook for them to latch onto, no explosive reaction to analyze, and no emotional vulnerability to exploit. It is important to note that this is not about being passive or submissive. It is about intentional emotional detachment. You are essentially starving them of the attention they demand. When you stop providing the theater they need, they will often become frustrated and intensify their efforts at first, a phenomenon known as an extinction burst. But as you maintain your unwavering, boring, and neutral stance, they eventually find your lack of response to be low value. Over time, they will lose interest in using you as a source of supply and will be forced to move on to other targets who are still willing to provide the emotional volatility they require. This gives you the space to maintain your composure, protect your nervous system, and finally find the quiet distance necessary to prioritize your own mental health. Boundaries are often misunderstood as a mechanism to control or dictate the behavior of others. But in reality, they are an internal tool designed to govern your own actions, safety, and level of exposure. When dealing with a narcissist, the misconception that you can force them to behave respectfully is a trap that keeps you in a state of perpetual conflict. Instead, you must shift your perspective to understand that a boundary is not a request for them to change. It is a clear, ironclad rule about what you will personally allow in your life and how you will respond if that rule is violated. Setting a boundary is essentially establishing a personal policy of self-protection. It is you saying, I am not going to be available for this type of treatment, and then acting accordingly. For instance, a boundary might be the decision to hang up the phone the moment someone starts screaming, or to leave the room as soon as a conversation devolves into personal insults. Because narcissists thrive on bypassing your personal limits, they will inevitably test these boundaries to see if they hold weight. The efficacy of the boundary rests entirely on your willingness to enforce it, regardless of their reaction, guilt-tripping, or accusations of being unreasonable. You are not asking for their approval of your limits. You are simply defining the environment you are willing to occupy. When you internalize that boundaries are for your own protection, rather than for their correction, you stop waiting for them to acknowledge your worth. You take full ownership of your peace, creating a clear demarcation between the toxic behavior you refuse to tolerate and the life you intend to lead, thereby preventing the narcissist from infringing upon your mental and emotional well-being ever again. If you are finding yourself constantly drained by the people around you, and you're ready to stop the cycle of emotional manipulation, hit that subscribe button. We talk about the real, practical ways to reclaim your peace in a world full of difficult personalities. Detachment is the ultimate form of power when dealing with a narcissist because it physically and psychologically removes you from the transactional dynamic they rely on to maintain their influence. Narcissists view relationships as a marketplace of emotional currency. They perform and provoke specifically to earn a reaction, which serves as their validation and control mechanism. Your anger, tears, fear, and even your attempts to fix the dynamic are the payments you make into their account. Every time you react to their baiting, you are inadvertently confirming that they have the power to move you, hurt you, or define your day. Detachment is the act of closing that account. It involves pulling back your emotional investment and acknowledging that their behavior is a reflection of their internal instability rather than a commentary on your worth. When you master the art of detachment, you stop taking their words personally, recognizing that their insults are simply projections of their own internal dysfunction. This shift allows you to observe them with a sense of clinical distance, almost as if you are watching a scripted performance rather than participating in a genuine human interaction. By withholding your emotional engagement, you render their manipulation ineffective, effectively bankrupting their ability to impact your state of mind. You are essentially choosing to stop being a player in their game. This is not a cold or uncaring stance. It is a profound act of self-preservation that creates a protective barrier around your mental health. As you detach, you reclaim the energy that was once consumed by their drama and redirect it toward your own growth, autonomy, and peace of mind. By refusing to pay the emotional toll they demand, you strip them of their leverage, making it impossible for them to hold your happiness hostage any longer. The power of no is the most potent, concise weapon in your arsenal against a personality that thrives on negotiation and emotional entanglement. In the context of dealing with a narcissist, no is not merely a refusal. It is a declaration of autonomy that strips them of the ability to demand your time, energy, or compliance. The difficulty for most lies in the ingrained habit of over-explaining. Many feel a compulsion to provide a rationale for their refusal, hoping that if the explanation is logical or kind enough, the other person will understand and respect the choice. However, narcissists do not view reasons as valid justification. They view them as arguments to be dismantled or loopholes to be exploited. When you offer a preamble, such as, "I'm sorry, I can't do that because I'm feeling overwhelmed," you are essentially handing them the tools to guilt trip you or talk you out of your decision. To reclaim your power, you must strip no of its apologetic veneer. A firm, complete no requires no further clarification, no defense, and certainly no apology. When you keep it brief, you leave no room for debate, manipulation, or the shifting of reality. It forces the narcissist to confront a solid barrier they cannot move or argue away. By eliminating the justifications, you stop participating in their game of control, signaling that your decisions are absolute and your boundaries are non-negotiable. This level of brevity is often uncomfortable at first because it contradicts our social conditioning to be agreeable, but it is necessary for maintaining your mental equilibrium. When you stop qualifying your refusal, you move from a position of trying to convince them of your worth to one of embodying your own sovereignty, effectively silencing their attempts to exert dominance over your life.
The hook is the classic baiting maneuver a narcissist uses to lure you back into a state of emotional volatility, and recognizing it is the critical pivot point for your own mental defense. A hook is essentially a provocation, an inflammatory statement, a false accusation, or an exaggerated crisis designed specifically to trigger an immediate defensive or emotional reaction from you. They are testing the waters to see if you are still plugged in to their drama. If you take the bait, you confirm that you are still vulnerable to their manipulation, and you provide them with the very attention or conflict they crave. Recognizing the hook requires you to cultivate a moment of conscious pause between their words and your reaction. Instead of instinctively rushing to defend your honor or correct their distorted version of events, you must train yourself to identify the attempt for what it is, a tactical ploy, not a genuine conversation. When you see the hook, you have a split-second opportunity to choose a different path. You can decide not to bite. This does not mean you are ignoring the situation, but rather that you are choosing not to reward the behavior with the reaction they are fishing for. By refusing to engage with the provocation, you are effectively cutting the line. The power shift is immediate. The narcissist is left holding an empty line while you maintain your composure and your autonomy. Over time, as you consistently identify these hooks and decline to snap at them, the narcissist realizes that their usual tactics no longer produce the desired results. Recognizing the pattern is the first step toward breaking it, allowing you to move through life with a defensive awareness that protects your peace from being shattered by the calculated provocations of others. Consistency is the bedrock of effective boundary setting, because a boundary without a consequence is essentially a suggestion that the narcissist will inevitably choose to ignore. When you establish a rule for your own protection, you are making a commitment to your own well-being. And if you fail to follow through when that boundary is crossed, you are inadvertently teaching the other person that your words hold no weight. Narcissists are experts at testing limits to determine exactly how much they can get away with, and they rely on the hope that your resolve will weaken under pressure, guilt, or manipulation. Therefore, a consequence must be clearly defined and immediately enforceable, such as ending a phone call, physically leaving a room, or choosing not to attend a specific event. The key to success is not the severity of the consequence, but the reliability with which it is applied every single time the line is crossed. If you set a boundary, but only enforce it occasionally, you are actually reinforcing the narcissist's belief that if they push hard enough, they can eventually break through your resistance. By contrast, if you are as consistent and predictable as a law of nature, if they do X, you will always do Y. You remove the element of negotiation from the equation entirely. This consistency protects you from the emotional exhaustion of constant conflict, as it turns your response into a programmed reaction rather than a fresh argument every time. Over time, this creates a predictable environment where the narcissist learns that encroaching upon your space or respect results in the immediate removal of your presence, which is the one thing they cannot control or manipulate. By being unfailingly consistent, you transform your boundaries from fragile requests into solid, protective barriers that safeguard your mental health and force the other person to accept the terms of engagement you have set. The path to reclaiming your peace is not found in changing the person who seeks to disrupt it, but in fundamentally changing the way you show up in the dynamic. You have spent far too long pouring your energy into a bottomless pit, hoping that if you just provided enough evidence, enough logic, or enough grace, the dynamic would shift. It hasn't, and it won't. The power you are looking for has been within your control the entire time. It exists in your refusal to participate in the chaos. By mastering the art of detachment, embracing the brevity of a firm no, and enforcing consistent consequences, you stop being a supporting character in their drama and become the protagonist of your own life. This is not about winning an argument or teaching someone a lesson. It is about protecting your internal landscape from being colonized by someone else's dysfunction. When you stop providing the emotional currency they demand, you render their manipulation obsolete. You deserve to live in a reality defined by your own values rather than someone else's projections. Choose your peace over their validation. Choose your silence over their noise. And recognize that your worth is not a debate you need to win. You are not a target. You are a person with boundaries. And those boundaries are now non-negotiable. Walk away from the games. Hold your ground with unwavering consistency and reclaim the energy you've spent on them to build a life that is finally, unapologetically, your own.